The gunshot cracked through the evening air, sending dust flying at Lydia Ashcroft's heels as she ran across the parched New Mexico soil, her heart thundering louder than the hoofbeats of the horses behind her. Never in her 23 years had she imagined her father's death would leave her not just orphaned, but hunted like a wounded doe by men who saw only the value of her land and nothing of the woman who rightfully owned it. The year was 1882, and White Oaks, New Mexico, had transformed from a sleepy settlement to a bustling mining town in just a few short years after gold was discovered. That transformation had brought both prosperity and predators to the territory. Lydia's father, Jonathan Ashcroft, had claimed his 160 acres under the Homestead Act years before the gold rush. He'd built a modest ranch on land that was now considered prime property due to its location and the suspicion that gold veins ran beneath it. Lydia's lungs burned as she fled through the scrubby terrain. Her father had been buried less than a week before Wallace Thornton, the owner of the largest mine in the territory, had appeared at her door with papers claiming her father had taken a loan he couldn't repay. The debt conveniently amounted to the worth of her land. When she'd thrown the papers back in Thornton's face and threatened to speak to the territorial judge, his demeanor had changed from falsely sympathetic to openly threatening. "You won't be speaking to anyone, Miss Ashcroft," he'd growled. "A woman alone can have many unfortunate accidents out here." That night, shots had been fired through her windows. The next morning, she'd packed what little she could carry and fled. Now, as the sun sank toward the jagged horizon, she was running out of both strength and options. The men pursuing her Thornton's hired guns were gaining ground. Her legs wobbled with exhaustion as she veered toward a stand of juniper trees, praying for a miracle. The miracle came in the form of a lasso that dropped around her waist, yanking her sideways into a small ravine. Before she could scream, a calloused hand covered her mouth. "Quiet," a deep voice commanded in her ear. "They're still looking." Lydia froze, staring up into the steadiest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man in his late 20s, with a dust-covered Stetson pushed back on his head, revealing a shock of dark hair. He was watching the ridge above them with laser-like focus, his body tensed like a mountain lion ready to pounce. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. "She can't have disappeared," a gruff voice shouted. "Thornton wants that land deed by tomorrow." "Maybe she headed toward town," another voice suggested. "Spread out, check every bush and rock, she can't have gone far." The blue-eyed stranger pressed Lydia deeper into the shadow of the ravine, his body shielding hers. He smelled of leather, horse, and sun-warmed cotton. They remained motionless as boots crunched on the rocky ground above. After what seemed like an eternity, the sounds began to fade. "They've moved on," the man whispered, finally removing his hand from her mouth. "But they'll be back." "Who are you?" Lydia demanded, her voice barely a rasp after hours of running. "Reese Hawkins," he answered, standing and offering her a hand up. "I've got a cabin about a mile from here. You need to hide, and you look like you could use some water and food." Lydia hesitated, eyeing his extended hand. "How do I know you're not working for Thornton too?" Reese's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Because Thornton and I have history, and none of it's good. He's been trying to run small ranchers like me off our land for years. I'm not about to help him do the same to you." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Lydia took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "My horse is tethered just beyond that ridge," Reese said, pointing. "Can you walk a little further?" Lydia nodded, though her legs felt like water. "I've been walking or running since dawn. A little more won't kill me." Reese's horse was a magnificent buckskin gelding that eyed Lydia curiously as they approached. Reese helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The solid warmth of his chest against her back was the first comfort she'd felt in days. "Hold tight," he murmured, and set the horse trotting away from the setting sun, taking a winding path through rocky terrain that would be difficult to track. As they rode, Lydia found herself relaxing incrementally against Reese's sturdy frame. The rhythm of the horse's hooves and the fading adrenaline made her eyelids heavy. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I haven't slept properly in days." "Rest," Reese replied, his voice a low rumble against her back. I've got you. Against her better judgment, Lydia let her eyes close, lulled by exhaustion and the strange sense of safety this stranger provided. When she opened her eyes again, the landscape had changed. They were moving through a pine forest, the air cooler and fresher than the dusty plains. The moon had risen, casting silver light through the branches. "Where are we?" she asked groggily. "Almost home," Reese answered. "I've got a small spread in these hills, not much to look at, but it's defensible." Minutes later, they emerged into a small clearing. A sturdy log cabin stood against the base of a rocky outcropping with a corral and small barn nearby. A creek bubbled somewhere in the darkness. Reese dismounted and helped Lydia down, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Easy there," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Let's get you inside." The cabin was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area adjacent. A curtain partitioned off what Lydia assumed was a sleeping area. Reese quickly lit a lamp and the cabin glowed with warm light. "Sit," he instructed, pointing to a wooden chair by a rough-hewn table. "I'll heat up some stew." Too tired to argue, Lydia sank into the chair, watching as Reese moved efficiently around the small space, stoking the banked fire and hanging a pot over it. He poured water from a pitcher into a cup and handed it to her. "Drink slowly," he advised. "You look half dead from thirst." Lydia sipped the cool water, studying her rescuer in the lamplight. Reese Hawkins was tall and lean, with the wiry strength of a man who worked hard for a living. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way, with those striking blue eyes standing out against his tanned skin. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Reese paused in his task of cutting bread. "Like I said, Thornton and I have history, but more than that." He shrugged one shoulder. "My pa taught me that a man stands up for what's right, especially when it comes to protecting those who can't protect themselves." "I can protect myself," Lydia said, a flash of pride cutting through her exhaustion. "Or I could before my father died. He taught me to shoot and ride as well as any man." Reese nodded approvingly. "Good, you'll need those skills, but right now you need rest and a plan." "Thornton doesn't give up easily." "What happened between you two?" Lydia asked, accepting the bowl of steaming stew he placed before her. Reese sat across from her, his face shadowed. 4 years ago, when gold was first discovered, my family had a small cattle ranch about 10 miles from here. Thornton wanted it for the water rights. When my father refused to sell, there was a fire. My parents didn't make it out of the house." Lydia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." "Nothing could be proven," Reese continued, his voice tight, "but everyone knew. I salvaged what cattle I could and moved up here. It's smaller, harder to ranch, but at least it's defensible." His eyes locked with hers. "So when I say I understand what you're facing, I'm not just talking." They ate in silence for a while, Lydia's mind racing despite her exhaustion. "I have the deed," she said finally. "It's sewn into the hem of my dress. Father always said to keep important papers close." Reese nodded approvingly. "Smart man, your father, but a piece of paper won't stop Thornton's bullets. We need a better plan." Lydia questioned, raising an eyebrow. Reese's gaze was steady. "You're welcome to leave at first light if you prefer to handle this alone, but if you stay, I'll help you fight for what's yours." "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to lose everything to a man like Thornton." Lydia studied him for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "All right then, Mr. Hawkins, what's your plan?" "First you rest," he said firmly. "Tomorrow we figure out how to keep you and your land safe from Thornton and his men. And please call me Reese." "Lydia," she offered in return, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after days on the run. "There's a wash basin behind that curtain," Reese said, as if reading her mind. "And I can lend you a clean shirt to sleep in. It'll be big, but better than sleeping in dusty clothes." "Thank you," Lydia said, the simple kindness nearly bringing tears to her eyes after days of fear. Reese showed her to the small sleeping area, then excused himself to tend to his horse. Alone, Lydia washed the dust from her face and arms, combed her tangled dark hair with her fingers, and changed into the offered shirt which hung to her knees. She was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed when Reese returned. "You take the bed," he said, grabbing a blanket from a chest. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Lydia protested. "You can and you will," Reese said firmly. "You've been through hell, Lydia. Get some sleep. Things will look clearer in the morning." Too exhausted to argue further, Lydia slid under the quilt. The bed smelled of sun-dried cotton and pine, clean and comforting. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Reese moving quietly around the cabin, checking locks, banking the fire. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to truly rest. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Lydia opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through a small window. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly. Reese was at the stove, his back to her. He'd clearly been up for some time. His hair was damp, as if freshly washed. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He turned, a smile warming his features. "Morning, there's coffee if you want it." Lydia rose, suddenly self-conscious in his oversized shirt. She grabbed her dress, now somewhat cleaner after she'd shaken it out the night before. "Take your time," Reese said, turning back to the stove. "Breakfast is almost ready." Behind the privacy of the curtain, Lydia dressed quickly, wishing for a proper brush and mirror. She did her best to tidy her appearance using just her fingers and the small basin of water Reese had left. When she emerged, he had plates of bacon, fried potatoes, and cornbread waiting on the table. Lydia's stomach growled audibly at the sight. "Eat," Reese encouraged, pouring her a cup of coffee. "You'll need your strength." They ate in companionable silence for a while, Lydia savoring the simple but delicious food. When her plate was nearly empty, she finally broached the subject foremost in her mind. "What now?" she asked. "Thornton won't stop looking for me." Reese nodded, his expression serious. "No, he won't. But he can't take your land without the deed, and he can't force you to sign anything if he can't find you." "I can't hide forever," Lydia pointed out. "No, but we can buy time to build a case against him," Reese said. "The territorial judge passes through White Oaks every few months. He's due in about 3 weeks. If we can gather evidence of Thornton's illegal activities, and I'm certain there are many, we might be able to get protection for you and your property." 3 weeks is a long time," Lydia said dubiously. "It is," Reese agreed. "But I've been watching Thornton for years, gathering information. I've never had enough to move against him, but with you as a witness to his threats and whatever evidence we can collect, we might finally have a chance." Hope flickered in Lydia's chest for the first time in days. "You really think it could work?" "I do," Reese said, his confidence bolstering hers. "But first, we need to make sure you stay safe. Thornton has eyes everywhere. We can't risk going into town, and we need to assume he'll eventually look up here. What do you suggest?" "I have a friend, Jacob Running Fox. He lives on the reservation about a day's ride from here. His sister, Mary, is married to a white man and lives in a settlement nearby. They might be willing to take you in until the judge arrives." Lydia considered this. "And what will you be doing while I'm in hiding?" "Gathering evidence," Reese said. "I'll need to be able to move freely, talk to people who might have information about Thornton's dealings." "That sounds dangerous," Lydia said, concern coloring her voice. Reese's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I can handle myself." "So can I," Lydia said firmly. "And I'm not running away while you put yourself at risk. This is my fight, too." "Lydia, no," she interrupted. "My father didn't raise a coward. I won't hide while others fight my battles. There must be another way." Reese studied her, his expression a mix of frustration and respect. Finally, he sighed. "All right, but we'll need to be careful, very careful." "I can be careful," Lydia promised. "And I'm a good shot, like I said." "You may need to prove that," Reese muttered, rising to clear the plates. Lydia helped him wash up, the domestic task feeling strangely intimate in the small cabin. As they worked side by side, she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. There was something deeply reassuring about Reese Hawkins' steadiness, a quiet strength that made her feel that perhaps, just perhaps, they might survive this ordeal. After breakfast, Reese led her outside to show her the layout of his small ranch. The morning was bright and clear, the pine-scented air refreshing after the close confines of the cabin. From the high vantage point, she could see for miles across the rugged terrain. "It's beautiful up here," she commented, gazing out over the rolling hills. "It is," Reese agreed. "Not as good for cattle as the lowland was, but it has other advantages. Like being hard to find," he nodded. "That, and multiple escape routes if needed. There's a cave system behind the cabin that leads to an exit about half a mile away. And several game trails that could be used in an emergency." "You've thought of everything," Lydia observed. "When you're living with a target on your back, you learn to plan ahead," Reese said grimly. "Speaking of which, let's see how good a shot you really are." He led her to a small clearing where he'd set up several bottles on a fallen log. From a locked box in the barn, he retrieved a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver. "Lady's choice," he said, offering both. Lydia took the revolver, checking it with practiced hands. "My father preferred this for close work," she explained. "Said it was more accurate in a tight spot." Reese raised an eyebrow, impressed by her handling of the weapon. "Show me what you can do." Lydia took aim at the farthest bottle, steadied her breathing as her father had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The bottle shattered, pieces of glass glinting in the morning sun. "Not bad," Reese acknowledged. "Try the others." 5 shots later, all the bottles lay in fragments. Lydia lowered the smoking gun, a small smile of satisfaction on her face. "Will that do?" Reese's expression had changed from skeptical to respectful. "That'll do just fine. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My mother died when I was young," Lydia explained, handing the gun back. "Father said he wouldn't always be around to protect me, so I'd better learn to protect myself. We practiced every Sunday after church." "Smart man," Reese said, reloading the revolver. "My offer to take you to Jacob's still stands, but I can see you might be more valuable as a partner than as a charge to be protected." "Partner," Lydia repeated, liking the sound of it. "So what's our next move, partner?" Reese's expression grew serious again. "We need information. Who Thornton's bribing, who he's threatened, what illegal operations he's running besides strong-arming people off their land. For that, we'll need to talk to people in town." "You said that was too dangerous," Lydia reminded him. "It is if we go as ourselves, but what if we didn't?" There was a calculating look in his eye that made Lydia both nervous and intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "A disguise," Reese said. "If we can change your appearance enough, you might be able to move about without being recognized. Thornton's men are looking for a young woman alone, not a married couple." "Married couple?" Lydia repeated, her cheeks suddenly warm. "Just for show," Reese clarified quickly. "It's the most natural cover, and it would explain why we're together. We could say we're passing through, looking to settle, asking questions about the area." It was a logical plan, Lydia had to admit. Still, the idea of pretending to be Reese's wife made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It might work, she conceded. "But how do we change my appearance enough? Thornton's men got a good look at me." "We'll start with your hair," Reese said, studying her critically. "It's pretty distinctive, those dark curls. If we cut it shorter, maybe lighten it somehow." "Cut my hair." Lydia's hand flew protectively to her long tresses, which reached nearly to her waist. Reese's expression softened. "I know it's a lot to ask, but hair grows back. Your land and your life are worth more." He was right, of course. Lydia took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, what else?" "Different clothes, maybe spectacles if we can find them, and we'll need to come up with a believable background story." Reese paused, thinking. "I have some clothes that belong to my sister-in-law. She and her husband stayed here for a while before moving on to California. They might fit you." "You've been alone up here since your parents died?" Lydia asked softly. A shadow crossed Reese's face. "My brother Thomas was with me for the first 2 years. He and his wife left for California when she was expecting their first child, thought it would be safer there." "Do you hear from them?" "Letters, now and then. They have a boy now, almost 2. There was a wistfulness in his voice that tugged at Lydia's heart. "You must miss them." "I do," he admitted, "but it was the right choice for them, this life." He gestured at the isolated cabin. "It's not for everyone." "No," Lydia agreed. "It takes a special kind of strength." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared resilience, of understanding what it meant to stand alone against forces that sought to overwhelm them. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Reese tensed immediately, his hand going to the gun at his hip. "Inside," he ordered quietly, all business again. "Stay low and out of sight." They retreated to the cabin, Reese positioning himself by the window with his rifle while Lydia crouched below the sill, peering carefully over the edge. A lone rider was approaching up the trail, moving at an unhurried pace. "Not Thornton's men," Reese murmured after a moment. "They travel in pairs or more, looks like." He squinted. "It's Jacob." The tension in his body eased slightly, though he didn't lower the rifle until the rider drew close enough for his features to become distinct. The man was clearly Native American, with long dark hair and a weathered face. He rode his pinto pony with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Stay here," Reese told Lydia, moving to the door. "Jacob's a friend, but the fewer people who know you're here, the better." Lydia nodded, though she remained by the window, watching as Reese stepped onto the porch to greet the newcomer. The two men clasped forearms in greeting, their body language relaxed and familiar. They spoke for several minutes, too quietly for Lydia to hear. Then, to her surprise, Reese gestured toward the cabin and both men started walking toward it. The door opened and Reese entered, followed by his visitor. "Lydia, this is Jacob Running Fox," Reese said. "Jacob, Miss Lydia Ashcroft, Miss Ashcroft." Jacob greeted her with a respectful nod. "Reese tells me you're in trouble with Thornton. That makes you a friend in my book." "Thank you," Lydia said, rising to her full height. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Running Fox." "Just Jacob," he corrected with a small smile. "I came to warn Reese. Thornton's men are asking questions in town, offering money for information about a young woman matching your description. They're saying you stole something valuable from him." "That's a lie," Lydia said hotly. "The only thing I have that Thornton wants is my land, and that's legally mine." "I believe you," Jacob assured her. "But money talks, and there are always those willing to listen. It won't be long before someone points them this way." Reese frowned. "Why would anyone suspect she's here? You were seen," Jacob explained. "Old Jim Tucker was hunting up near Serpent Ridge yesterday evening. Says he saw you riding double, heading this way. He mentioned it at the saloon this morning." Reese swore under his breath. Tucker never could keep his mouth shut. "Fortunately, he didn't get a good look at who was with you," Jacob continued. "Just said it looked like a woman, but it won't take long for Thornton's men to connect the dots." Lydia felt a chill despite the warmth of the cabin. "So they'll be coming here." "Likely," Jacob agreed. "Which is why I came to warn you." He turned to Reese. "My offer still stands. I can take her to Mary's place. She'd be safe there." Reese glanced at Lydia, who shook her head firmly. "We've already discussed that option," he told Jacob. "Lydia prefers to stay and fight." Jacob studied Lydia with new interest. "Is that so?" "It is," Lydia confirmed. "This is my battle as much as anyone's, more so since it's my land at stake." "We were just discussing a plan," Reese added. "Disguises, a cover story. We need to gather evidence against Thornton before the judge arrives." Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "It could work, but you'll need help." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in leather. "This might be useful. It's a hair dye my people make from walnut shells. It will turn her hair black as a crow's wing." "Thank you," Lydia said, accepting the bundle. "That's very kind. I have no love for Thornton," Jacob said grimly. "He's tried to push our people off our lands more than once. Any enemy of his is a friend of mine." "Will you help us?" Reese asked. Jacob considered this, his dark eyes serious. "What do you need?" "Eyes and ears in town," Reese said. "Information about Thornton's operations, and possibly a safe place to meet with others who might be willing to testify against him." "I can do that," Jacob agreed. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles east of here, near the bend in the creek. It's been abandoned for years, but it's still standing. Would make a good meeting place." "Perfect," Reese said. "Can you spread the word discreetly?" "Anyone who's had trouble with Thornton, anyone who might have information. Tell them we'll be there 3 days from now after sunset." Jacob nodded. "I'll do what I can, but you should move soon. Thornton's men will be searching these hills by tomorrow at the latest." We'll be ready, Reese assured him. After Jacob left, promising to return with any new information, Reese and Lydia set about implementing their plan. First came the transformation of Lydia's appearance. She steeled herself as Reese carefully cut her long dark curls to just below her ears. The shorn locks fell to the cabin floor, each snip of the scissors making her wince inwardly. "I'm sorry," Reese said softly, seeing her distress. "If there was another way—" "There isn't," Lydia said firmly. "Keep cutting." When he was done, Lydia ran her fingers through what remained of her hair, the strange lightness of it disorienting. "How does it look? Different," Reese said diplomatically. "The dye will help even more." They mixed the walnut dye according to Jacob's instructions, and Lydia applied it to her hair, turning the rich brown to deep black. When it was done, she looked in the small mirror Reese provided, barely recognizing herself. "It worked," she said, turning her head to examine the effect from different angles. "I don't look like me anymore." "No one who's only seen you from a distance would recognize you," Reese agreed, "and with different clothes, the disguise will be complete." He brought out a trunk from beneath his bed, opening it to reveal women's clothing. "These were Elizabeth Thomas's wife," he explained. "She was about your size, I think." The clothing was simple but well made, a few cotton dresses, a skirt and blouses, a shawl and a bonnet. Lydia selected a blue dress that seemed closest to her size. "I'll try this on." Behind the privacy curtain, she changed quickly. The dress was a little loose in the waist but otherwise fit well enough. When she emerged, Reese stared at her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. "Will it do?" she asked, smoothing the unfamiliar fabric. "It will," he said, his voice slightly rough. "You look completely different. No one would connect you with Lydia Ashcroft." "Good," she said, pleased with the transformation. "Now we need a story. Who are we supposed to be?" Reese thought for a moment. "How about Richard and Laura Hunter, newly married, looking for land to settle on? We've heard there's opportunity in New Mexico territory." "Hunter," Lydia repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that could work." "But why would a young couple be asking questions about Thornton? We're cautious investors," Reese suggested. "We want to know who the important people in the area are, who to do business with, who to avoid." "And naturally, people will gossip," Lydia added, warming to the idea. "Telling us all the local scandals and suspicions." "Exactly," Reese said with a smile. "We'll need to be careful, though. Thornton has spies everywhere." "When do we start?" Lydia asked. "Tomorrow," Reese decided. "We'll take the back trail into town. It's longer but less likely to be watched. Tonight, we need to pack essentials in case we need to leave in a hurry." They spent the afternoon preparing, gathering supplies, ammunition, and food that would travel well. Reese showed Lydia the cave system behind the cabin, lighting a lantern to illuminate the narrow passages that twisted through the hillside. "If anything happens and we get separated," he explained, "follow this main tunnel. It branches twice. Take the left path both times. It will lead you out near a lightning-struck pine. From there, head northeast until you reach the creek, then follow it upstream. There's a hollow tree about half a mile up where I keep emergency supplies." Lydia committed the directions to memory, knowing her life might depend on them. As they emerged from the cave into the fading afternoon light, she was struck by how quickly her life had changed, how in the space of a week. She'd lost her father, her home, and now was preparing for a dangerous mission with a man she barely knew yet found herself trusting completely. "What are you thinking?" Reese asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That life can change in an instant," Lydia replied honestly. "A week ago, I was helping my father mend fences. Now I'm cutting my hair and dyeing it black, preparing to spy on one of the most dangerous men in the territory." Having second thoughts. There was no judgment in Reese's tone, only concern. "No," Lydia said firmly, "just adjusting. This isn't the life I expected, but it's the one I have now, and I'm grateful not to be facing it alone." She met his gaze directly. "Thank you, Reese, for everything." Something flickered in his blue eyes, warmth, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't name. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose everything to Thornton's greed. I couldn't stand by and let it happen to someone else." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound that made them both freeze. Horses, multiple riders approaching from the south. Reese's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Inside," he ordered tersely. "Gather what you can, we need to move now." Lydia didn't waste time asking questions. She hurried into the cabin, grabbing the small pack they'd prepared and stuffing in a few last essentials while Reese saddled his buckskin and a second horse, a sturdy bay mare that he kept for backup. "They're coming faster than I expected," he muttered as he worked, his movements swift and efficient. Jacob must not have been the only one who heard about Tucker's sighting. "Will we take the cave route?" Lydia asked, buckling her pack. Reese shook his head. "Too risky in daylight." "They might see us emerge. We'll head north through the high country. There's plenty of cover and I know those trails better than anyone." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Reese handed Lydia the reins to the bay mare. "Stay close behind me. If we get separated, keep heading north until you reach the old trapper's cabin Jacob mentioned. I'll find you there." Lydia nodded, her heart pounding but her mind clear. This was no time for fear. They mounted quickly and set off at a canter, staying within the tree line to avoid being spotted from a distance. They'd barely gone a quarter mile when a shout went up behind them. "There they are," a gruff voice bellowed. "Get after them, ride," Reese urged, spurring his buckskin to a gallop. Lydia followed suit, ducking low over her mare's neck as they crashed through the underbrush. The sound of pursuit followed them, but Reese led them on a winding path through the trees, up steep inclines and down rocky slopes that slowed their pursuers. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just to Lydia's left. She flinched but kept riding, keeping her focus on Reese's broad back ahead of her. They plunged through a shallow stream, followed it for several hundred yards, then veered sharply east, climbing a rocky slope that the horses navigated with sure-footed determination. At the top, Reese paused briefly, listening. The sounds of pursuit had faded but not disappeared entirely. "We've gained some ground," he said, "but they'll pick up our trails soon enough. We need to split up." "No," Lydia protested. "We stick together." "Listen to me," Reese said urgently. "I'll lead them away, make them think we're both heading west. You continue north to the trapper's cabin. I'll circle back and meet you there by nightfall." "It's too dangerous," Lydia argued. "What if they catch you?" "They won't," Reese assured her with confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know these mountains like the back of my hand. I can lose them and double back." Lydia wanted to protest further, but she recognized the tactical wisdom of his plan. Together, they made a more visible target. Separated, at least one of them had a better chance of escaping. "Promise you'll be careful," she said finally. "I promise," Reese said, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You too, north about 3 miles. The cabin is in a small clearing near a stand of aspens. You can't miss it." Before she could say anything more, he leaned over and pressed something into her hand, his Colt revolver. "Take this. Use it if you have to." Then he was gone, crashing deliberately through the underbrush to the west, making as much noise as possible to draw attention. Lydia watched him go, fear and admiration warring in her chest. Then, clutching the revolver, she turned her mare north and rode as quietly as possible, staying within the densest parts of the forest. She rode steadily for nearly an hour, listening constantly for sounds of pursuit, but heard nothing beyond the natural noises of the forest. Eventually, she spotted a clearing ahead with the promised stand of aspens, their leaves shimmering silver in the afternoon light. In the center stood a small, weather-beaten cabin. Approaching cautiously, Lydia circled the structure once to ensure it was empty, then dismounted and led her mare to a small lean-to at the back that served as a rudimentary stable. Inside the cabin, she found a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame covered with a dusty mattress. It clearly hadn't been occupied in years, but it was structurally sound and, most importantly, hidden from the main trails. Lydia settled in to wait, unsaddling her mare and giving her water from a nearby stream. As the hours passed and the sun began to set with no sign of Reese, her worry grew. Had he successfully led their pursuers away, or had he been captured, or worse, darkness fell and still Reese didn't appear? Lydia dared not light a fire, despite the chill that was settling into the cabin. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket from her pack and sat by the window, watching the moonlit clearing, his revolver ready in her hand. It was well past midnight when she heard the soft nicker of a horse responding to her mare's greeting. Lydia tensed, raising the revolver. A shadow detached itself from the trees, leading a horse. The moonlight caught on familiar features. Reese. Relief flooded through her. She quickly moved to the door, opening it just as he reached the cabin. He looked exhausted, a fresh cut on his cheekbone, but otherwise unharmed. "You made it," she whispered, stepping aside to let him enter. "Told you I would," he replied, his voice tired but tinged with triumph. "I led them all the way to Miller's Canyon before losing them in the rocks. They'll be searching that area until morning at least." "You're hurt," Lydia said, noticing the blood on his face more clearly in the moonlight that filtered through the cabin's single window. "It's nothing," Reese dismissed, though he didn't protest when she made him sit at the table and used water from her canteen to clean the cut. "What happened?" she asked, her fingers gentle on his skin. "Branch caught me when I was riding fast. It's not deep." Lydia nodded, relieved. "I was worried when you didn't come by nightfall. Had to take the long way around," Reese explained. "Make sure I wasn't followed." He caught her hand as she finished cleaning the cut. "You did well today, Lydia. Not everyone would have kept their head in a situation like that." His touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she was suddenly very aware of how alone they were, how intimate the small cabin felt in the darkness. "I told you my father taught me to take care of myself," she said, trying to keep her voice light as she withdrew her hand. "He did a good job," Reese said, a smile evident in his voice even in the dim light. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll need to adjust our plans." "I've been thinking about that," Lydia said, sitting across from him at the table. "They know your face now and they'll be watching for you in town, but they haven't seen me since my transformation." She gestured at her cropped, dyed hair. "I could go alone, play the part of a widow passing through, asking questions." "Absolutely not," Reese said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "It makes tactical sense," Lydia argued. "I'm less recognizable, and a woman alone attracts a different kind of attention than a man. People will want to help me, tell me things." "And if you're recognized, then I run," Lydia said simply. "I've proven I can do that effectively." Reese was silent for a long moment, clearly torn between the logic of her argument and his protective instincts. "I don't like it," he said finally. "But you're right, it makes sense. On one condition, I'll be nearby watching. At the first sign of trouble, you get out of there." "Agreed," Lydia said, offering her hand to seal the deal. Reese took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. "We'll head out at first light. There's a small settlement called Cedar Creek about 10 miles north of here. Smaller than White Oaks, but still connected. Good place to start asking questions without as many of Thornton's men around." They settled in to sleep as best they could, Reese insisting Lydia take the narrow bed while he made do with his bedroll on the floor. Despite her exhaustion, Lydia found sleep elusive, her mind racing with the events of the day and the dangers that lay ahead. Across the small room, she could hear Reese's steady breathing, finding an odd comfort in the sound. Tomorrow they would begin their dangerous game of gathering evidence against one of the most powerful men in the territory. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, Lydia felt a strange calm. Whatever happened, she wasn't facing it alone. The next few days fell into a pattern. They would ride to a different settlement each day: Cedar Creek, Pinon Springs, dry gulch places connected to White Oaks by trade but small enough that Thornton's influence wasn't as immediate. Lydia would enter alone, playing the part of Laura Hunter, a young widow considering settling in the area. Reese would watch from a distance, ready to intervene if necessary. To Lydia's surprise, she proved quite adept at her role. There was something freeing about pretending to be someone else, about the short black hair and the widow's clothes. People responded to her apparent vulnerability, eager to share information, gossip, warnings. "Oh, you don't want to get mixed up with Wallace Thornton's businesses, dearie," an elderly shopkeeper's wife told her in Cedar Creek. "My nephew worked in his mine for 6 months. Says the support beams are rotting, but Thornton won't pay for new ones. 3 men died in a collapse last year. Hushed up, of course." In Pinon Springs, A saloon girl named Ruby confided that Thornton's men regularly transported mysterious crates at night, avoiding the main roads and official checkpoints. Military supplies, they say, but ain't no soldiers I ever seen need that much. Rumor is he's selling guns to both sides in the Apache conflicts. Each evening, Lydia and Reese would return to the trapper's cabin to compare notes, building a picture of Thornton's operations that was increasingly damning. Unsafe mining practices, gun running, bribery of local officials, intimidation of small landowners, even possible involvement in several accidental deaths of people who had opposed him. "It's more than I ever expected," Reese said on the fourth night, reviewing their growing list of witnesses and allegations. "If even half of these people are willing to testify when the judge comes through." "Will they, though?" Lydia questioned. "Talking to me is one thing, standing up in public against Thornton is another." "Some will," Reese said confidently. "Jacob's been spreading the word about the meeting. Those who are serious about taking a stand will come." The meeting was set for the following evening at the abandoned church outside Dry Gulch. It was remote enough to be safe from Thornton's spies, but accessible to those brave enough to attend. As they prepared for bed that night, Lydia found herself watching Reese as he cleaned his rifle by the light of the small fire they now dared to build in the cabin's fireplace. There was an ease to his movements, a quiet competence that she had come to admire deeply. Over the past days, they had developed a partnership that went beyond their shared goal of bringing down Thornton. They anticipated each other's thoughts, moved in synchrony, trusted each other's judgment. And somewhere along the way, Lydia realized she had begun to see Reese as more than an ally. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. This was hardly the time for such feelings, with their lives in constant danger, and yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when he smiled at her or the comfort she found in his presence. "What are you thinking about?" Reese asked, catching her gaze on him. Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dim light that concealed it. "Tomorrow," she said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Whether people will actually come to the meeting." Reese set aside his rifle, his expression serious. "They'll come. People have been waiting for a chance to stand against Thornton. They just needed someone to lead the way." His eyes held hers. "You've given them that, Lydia. Your courage has inspired others." "Our courage," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Finally, Reese spoke again, his voice different, somehow softer, more hesitant than she'd ever heard it. "When this is over," he began, then paused, seeming to search for words. "After Thornton is dealt with and your land is secure, what will you do?" The question caught Lydia off guard. She'd been so focused on survival and justice that she hadn't thought much beyond it. "I don't know," she admitted. "Try to rebuild, I suppose." "The ranch will need work after sitting empty." Reese nodded, his eyes on the fire. "It's good land, worth fighting for." "Yes," Lydia agreed, "though I'm not sure I want to work it alone. It was different when my father was alive. We were a team." "You wouldn't have to be alone," Reese said, the words coming out in a rush. "That is, I mean, there are options." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of options?" Reese met her gaze finally, something vulnerable and hopeful in his blue eyes. "Partnerships of various kinds, business, or—" He trailed off, seeming suddenly unsure. "Or," Lydia prompted softly, hardly daring to breathe. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, with deliberate movement, Reese rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Lydia," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I know we've only known each other a short time, but these past days, I feel like I've known you always. You're the bravest, most determined woman I've ever met." And whatever he had been about to say, was cut off by the sound of a horse approaching at speed. They both tensed, reaching for weapons instinctively. Reese moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "It's Jacob," he said, relief evident in his voice. He opened the door as the Native American rider dismounted. "You need to move," Jacob said without preamble, his normally calm demeanor visibly shaken. "Thornton's men found your cabin, Reese. They tore it apart looking for evidence of where you might have gone." They're questioning everyone, offering rewards. It won't be long before someone talks. What about the meeting tomorrow? Lydia asked. It needs to be postponed, Jacob said grimly. There are too many of Thornton's men around. They're watching all the trails, all the settlements. It's not safe. Reese's jaw tightened. We can't wait. The judge will be in White Oaks in less than a week if we don't have witnesses ready to testify. You'll have no witnesses at all if they're all arrested or worse, Jacob pointed out. We need to be smart about this. Where can we go? Lydia asked, already moving to gather their few possessions. My sister's place, Jacob said. It's far enough from the settlements to be safe, and Mary's husband has influence with the local authorities. Thornton's men won't risk causing trouble there. Reese looked torn, clearly reluctant to abandon their plan. What about the evidence we've gathered, the witnesses who were willing to speak? I'll spread the word, Jacob promised. Tell them to come to White Oaks when the judge arrives. Those who are serious about standing against Thornton will still come. And if they don't, Lydia asked quietly, Jacob's expression was solemn, then you'll have to decide if your testimony alone is enough, but you can't testify at all if you're dead. The harsh truth of his words hung in the air. Finally, Reese nodded. All right, we'll go to Mary's, but we'll need to be in White Oaks when the judge arrives, with or without additional witnesses. They packed quickly, leaving the trapper's cabin as they'd found it. Jacob led them through the darkness, taking game trails and paths that wouldn't appear on any map. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Dawn was breaking when they arrived at a neat homestead nestled in a small valley. A log house, larger and more refined than Reese's cabin, stood amid fields of corn and wheat. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting the household was already awake. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, clearly Jacob's sister, with the same high cheekbones and dark eyes, though her dress and manner were those of someone who moved between two worlds with ease. Behind her came a tall, distinguished-looking white man with silver at his temples. Jacob, Mary greeted her brother, her concerned gaze moving to Reese and Lydia. These are the friends you spoke of. Yes, Jacob confirmed. Reese Hawkins and Miss Lydia Ashcroft. They need sanctuary for a few days. Of course, Mary said without hesitation. Any enemy of Thornton's is welcome here. She turned to her husband. William, please see to their horses while I prepare some breakfast. They look exhausted. William nodded, stepping forward to take the reins. Come inside when you're ready, he told them. You'll be safe here. As they dismounted, Lydia felt the full weight of the past day's exertions hit her. Her legs trembled with fatigue and she swayed slightly on her feet. Instantly, Reese was at her side, his arm around her waist to steady her. I've got you, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Just a little further. His support gave her the strength to make it into the house, where Mary quickly ushered them to a table laden with fresh bread, eggs, and coffee. The simple comforts a proper meal, clean water to wash with, chairs with cushions seemed almost unreal after their days of rough living. As they ate, William explained his connection to the situation. He was a former judge himself, now retired but still respected in legal circles. I've been watching Thornton's activities for years, he told them. Gathering information, but never quite enough to bring charges that would stick. With your testimony and the evidence you've collected, we might finally have a chance to see justice done. If the witnesses come forward, Reese said, the doubt clear in his voice. They will, William said confidently. The tide is turning against Thornton. People are tired of living under his shadow. They just needed someone to take the first stand. He nodded respectfully to Lydia. You've given them that courage, Miss Ashcroft. After the meal, Mary showed them to separate rooms where they could rest. The bed in Lydia's room was soft and clean, the luxury of it almost overwhelming after nights on a narrow cot or bedroll. Despite her exhaustion, she found herself thinking of Reese, of the moment in the cabin that had been interrupted. What had he been about to say? She must have slept, for when she next opened her eyes, the angle of sunlight through the window suggested it was late afternoon. She rose, washed her face in the basin Mary had provided, and changed into clean clothes from her pack. When she emerged, she found Reese, Jacob, William, and Mary gathered around the kitchen table, deep in discussion over maps and papers. "Ah, Miss Ashcroft," William greeted her. "We were just discussing strategy for when the judge arrives. Please join us." Lydia took the empty chair beside Reese, acutely aware of his presence the way his arm brushed hers as he shifted to make room. "We've been going through the evidence you've gathered," William continued. "It's compelling, especially when combined with what I've documented over the years. The unsafe mining practices alone would be enough for serious charges, but the weapons smuggling." He shook his head gravely. "That could mean federal charges." "But we still need witnesses willing to testify in person," Reese pointed out. "Documents and second-hand accounts won't be enough against someone with Thornton's influence." "Jacob has been spreading the word," Mary said. "Those who are serious about standing against Thornton will meet us directly in White Oaks when the judge arrives." "It's risky," Jacob acknowledged, "but necessary. Too many people moving at once would draw attention." They spent the next hour refining their plan. The judge was due in White Oaks in 3 days' time. They would travel separately, approaching the town from different directions to avoid detection. William would go ahead to prepare the ground, ensuring the judge understood the gravity of the situation before the formal hearing. As the discussion wound down, Mary suggested she prepare dinner, enlisting Jacob's help. William excused himself to write some letters, leaving Reese and Lydia alone at the table. An awkward silence fell between them, the interrupted moment from the previous night hanging unspoken in the air. Finally, Reese cleared his throat. "You should know, that is, I want to be clear about something." Lydia's heart quickened. "Yes, whatever happens in White Oaks," he said, his voice low and serious. "I meant what I was going to say last night, these past days with you." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I've never met anyone like you, Lydia. Your courage, your determination, your heart. You've made me see possibilities I thought were gone forever." Lydia could barely breathe, the intensity in his blue eyes holding her captive. "What possibilities?" Reese reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "A future, not just survival but living, building something worthwhile, together if that's something you might want." "Reese," Lydia began, her voice hardly more than a whisper. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "It's too soon, I know that, but I want you to know where I stand, where I hope we might stand when this is all over." Lydia turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us, it's like nothing I've ever experienced." The smile that broke across Reese's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," Lydia agreed, feeling as though her heart might burst with unexpected joy in the midst of all their danger. The moment was interrupted by Mary's return, but the understanding between them remained, a current of warmth and promise that sustained them through the tense days of preparation that followed. The morning they were to depart for White Oaks dawned clear and cool. The plan was set. William had left the previous day to prepare the ground with the judge. Jacob would approach from the east, bringing any witnesses who had agreed to testify. Mary would remain at the homestead as a fallback position if things went wrong. Reese and Lydia would enter town together, no longer hiding their identities, ready to present their evidence and testimony directly. As they saddled their horses, Lydia felt a strange mix of fear and determination. So much depended on the next 24 hours. Her land, her future, justice for her father and Reese's parents, it all hung in the balance. "Ready?" Reese asked, tightening the cinch on his buckskin saddle. Lydia nodded, adjusting her hat. Her hair was growing out slightly, the black dye beginning to fade, but she still didn't look entirely like her old self. Perhaps that was fitting. She wasn't the same person who had fled her home a week and a half ago. Mary embraced them both before they mounted. "Be careful," she urged. "Thornton will be desperate when he realizes what's happening. That makes him dangerous." "We will," Reese promised. The ride to White Oaks took most of the day, as they deliberately avoided the main trails. taking a circuitous route that would make it difficult for anyone to track or intercept them. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts, though the silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. As the sun began to set, the buildings of white oaks appeared in the distance. Lydia felt a tightening in her chest at the sight. The last time she'd seen the town, she'd been fleeing for her life. "We'll be staying at the Frontier Hotel," Reese reminded her as they approached. "William has arranged rooms for us under false names. The judge is already in town, staying at the mayor's house." "The hearing is set for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." Lydia nodded, straightening her spine. "Let's finish this." They rode into town as dusk was falling, the streets relatively quiet as most townsfolk were heading home for dinner or to the saloons for evening entertainment. They stabled their horses at the livery, then walked quickly to the Frontier Hotel, keeping their heads down and hats pulled low. The hotel clerk barely glanced at them as he handed over the keys to the rooms William had reserved. They went upstairs without incident, relieved to find adjoining rooms at the end of the hall, offering some privacy and a secondary escape route if needed. "Get some rest," Reese advised as they paused outside their respective doors. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "You too," Lydia replied, though she doubted either of them would sleep much. Impulsively, she reached out, catching his hand. "Reese, thank you for everything. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you has been the one bright spot in all this darkness." Reese's eyes softened, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently. "Get some sleep, Lydia. Tomorrow we face Thornton together after that." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear in the warmth of his gaze. Lydia nodded, reluctantly releasing his hand and entering her room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. She lay awake, listening to the muted sounds of the town through her window, thinking of all that had happened and all that was yet to come. She must have dozed eventually, for she woke with a start to the sound of a soft knock at the connecting door between her room and Reese's. The gray light filtering through her curtains suggested it was just before dawn. "Lydia," Reese's voice came through the door, urgent but controlled. "Are you awake?" She rose quickly, pulling a shawl around her nightdress as she opened the door. Reese stood fully dressed, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked, instantly alert. "Jacob just arrived," Reese said quietly. "He managed to contact me without being seen." "Thornton knows we're coming. Someone talked." A chill ran through Lydia. "What does that mean for the hearing?" "It's still on," Reese assured her. "The judge is determined to proceed, but Thornton's men are watching the courthouse, the hotel, all the main approaches to town. Jacob says they're armed and looking agitated." "And the witnesses?" Reese's expression gave her the answer before he spoke. "Most are too afraid to come forward now. A few are willing to provide written statements, but only if their names are kept confidential." Lydia absorbed this blow, her heart sinking. Without witnesses willing to testify in person, their case against Thornton would be significantly weakened. "So it comes down to our word against his," she said, voicing the grim reality. "Yes," Reese acknowledged. "But we still have the documentary evidence, and William's testimony will carry weight with the judge." "It's not over, Lydia," she nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I'll get dressed. What's the plan?" "We wait for William's signal," Reese explained. "He'll send someone when it's time for us to come to the courthouse. Until then, we stay out of sight." They spent the tense morning hours in Reese's room, speaking in low voices, reviewing their evidence and testimony one last time. Around 9:30, a knock came at the door. Reese motioned for Lydia to stay back while he answered it, his hand on his gun. It was a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, who delivered a simple message. "Mr. Henderson says it's time, sir. The back way, through the alley." Reese thanked the boy with a coin, then turned to Lydia. "Ready." She nodded, gathering the documents they'd organized. Together, they made their way down the back stairs of the hotel and through the alley behind it, moving swiftly but trying not to attract attention. The courthouse was only 2 blocks away, but those blocks felt exposed and dangerous in a way the open wilderness never had. They were halfway there when Lydia spotted them, 3 of Thornton's men, identifiable by their distinctive red bandanas. moving purposefully toward them from a side street. "Reese," she murmured in warning, tilting her head slightly in their direction. He nodded almost imperceptibly, adjusting their course to move closer to the buildings, providing some cover. "Keep walking," he instructed quietly. "Don't run unless I say." The men were closing the distance rapidly. One of them pointed in their direction, saying something to his companions that Lydia couldn't hear. All three increased their pace. "Miss Ashcroft," one of them called out, his voice carrying down the street. "Mr. Thornton would like a word with you." Reese's hand moved to his gun. "When I say run, head straight for the courthouse. Don't look back." Lydia's heart pounded, but she kept her face composed, her stride steady. They were less than a block from the courthouse now. She could see William standing on the steps, watching their approach with concern. The men were within 20 yards when a fourth figure appeared from nowhere, Jacob, moving with the silent grace of a hunter, stepping directly into their path. The momentary distraction was all they needed. "Now," Reese whispered urgently. "Run." Lydia gathered her skirts and ran, Reese at her side, the precious documents clutched to her chest. Behind them, she heard shouts, the sound of a scuffle, but she didn't look back as they raced up the courthouse steps. William ushered them inside, where a small crowd had gathered for the hearing. At the front of the room, behind a makeshift bench, sat Judge Harmon, a stern-looking man with penetrating eyes and a thick gray beard. And there, at a table to one side, sat Wallace Thornton himself, a heavy-set man in his 50s, expensively dressed, his face flushed with barely contained rage. His cold eyes locked onto Lydia's as she entered, and the hatred in them nearly made her stumble. Reese's hand at her elbow steadied her. "Don't look at him," he murmured. "He has no power over you here." They took their seats at the table opposite Thornton's, William joining them as their legal counsel. The judge called the hearing to order, explaining the serious nature of the accusations being brought against one of White Oak's most prominent citizens. What followed was an intense battle of wills and words. Thornton's lawyer, a slick, city-educated man named Phillips, argued that the entire case was built on hearsay and the vengeful accusations of a young woman overwhelmed by grief after her father's death. William countered with the documentary evidence they had gathered, presenting affidavits from miners about unsafe conditions, records of shipments that didn't match official manifests, suggesting illegal weapons trading, and testimonials from several small landowners who had been threatened or forced off their properties. Throughout the proceedings, Thornton stared at Lydia with undisguised malevolence, clearly trying to intimidate her. But each time she felt her resolve wavering, she would feel Reese's steady presence beside her, drawing strength from his unwavering support. When it came time for Lydia to testify, she rose on shaky legs but spoke in a clear, confident voice, recounting Thornton's threats, the forged loan documents, the shots fired at her home. Phillips tried repeatedly to rattle her, suggesting she was confused, emotional, possibly imagining threats where none existed. "Is it possible, Miss Ashcroft," Phillips suggested with false sympathy, "that in your grief over your father's passing, you misinterpreted Mr. Thornton's legitimate business offer?" Lydia met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Thornton told me, and I quote, 'A woman alone can have many unfortunate accidents out here. Hours later, shots were fired through my windows. I do not believe I misinterpreted anything.'" Reese's testimony followed, detailed and damning, connecting the attack on Lydia with similar patterns of intimidation he had witnessed over the years, including the suspicious fire that had killed his parents. As the hearing stretched into the afternoon, the courthouse grew crowded. Word had spread through town, and it seemed everyone wanted to witness the confrontation between Thornton and those who dared to stand against him. During a brief recess, William brought news that Jacob was safe. He had managed to elude Thornton's men after creating the diversion that allowed Reese and Lydia to reach the courthouse. But the news wasn't all good. "The judge is troubled by the lack of direct witnesses willing to testify in person," William confided in a low voice. "The documentary evidence is strong, but without corroborating testimony." Lydia's heart sank. After everything they'd been through, would Thornton still walk free, still hold power over their lives? As the hearing resumed, Phillips was in the middle of his closing argument, painting Thornton as a pillar of the community being persecuted by jealous competitors, when the courthouse doors swung open. Every head turned to see a group of people enter, miners in dirt-stained clothes, shopkeepers, ranchers, a saloon girl Lydia recognized as Ruby from Pinon Springs. They moved purposefully to the front of the room. "Your Honor," the leader of the group, a grizzled miner with a scarred face, addressed the judge. "We'd like to testify if it ain't too late." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Thornton half rose from his seat, his face mottled with fury, but his lawyer pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. Judge Harmon studied the newcomers thoughtfully. "This is highly irregular," he noted, "but given the serious nature of the allegations, I'll allow it." He fixed the group with a stern gaze. "You understand you'll be testifying under oath?" "Yes, Your Honor," the miner confirmed. "That's why we're here. Time somebody told the truth about Wallace Thornton, and we aim to do just that." What followed was a devastating series of testimonials. The miner described the cave-in that had killed 3 men, directly attributable to Thornton's refusal to replace rotting support beams despite repeated warnings. Ruby recounted overhearing Thornton's men discussing weapons shipments to both sides in the Apache conflicts. A shopkeeper detailed years of extortion disguised as protection fees. With each new testimony, Thornton seemed to physically shrink, his bluster giving way to pale-faced silence as he whispered frantically with his lawyer. Phillips attempted to discredit each witness, but the sheer number and consistency of their accounts proved overwhelming. As the last witness finished, Judge Harmon called for order in the increasingly animated courtroom. "I've heard enough," he announced gravely. "Based on the evidence and testimony presented, I find sufficient cause to bind Wallace Thornton over for trial on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, criminal negligence resulting in death, and illegal weapons trafficking." The judge banged his gavel definitively. "Mr. Thornton, you are remanded to custody pending trial. Bail is denied due to the severity of the charges and the demonstrated risk to witnesses." The courtroom erupted in cheers as 2 deputies moved to take Thornton into custody. The man who had terrorized the region for years was finally facing justice. In the commotion, Reese turned to Lydia, his blue eyes alight with triumph and something deeper, more personal. Without a word, he drew her into his arms, holding her tightly as the noise and celebration swirled around them. "We did it," he murmured against her hair. "It's over." "Not quite," Lydia replied, pulling back just enough to meet his gaze. "I still have a ranch to rebuild, a life to figure out." Reese smiled, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "About that. I was thinking maybe we could figure it out together." Before she could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers Jacob, William, the brave witnesses who had come forward at the last moment. The celebration spilled out onto the courthouse steps and into the street, the mood of the town transforming as word spread of Thornton's arrest. It wasn't until much later, as the sun was setting over White Oaks, that Reese and Lydia found themselves alone again, walking slowly toward her property on the outskirts of town. The small ranch house looked forlorn after its abandonment, windows still broken from the shots fired that night, dust and leaves blown inside. "It needs work," Lydia acknowledged, surveying her home with mixed emotions. "Nothing that can't be fixed," Reese said confidently, standing beside her as they gazed at the house. "The important thing is it's still yours, legally and rightfully." Lydia turned to him, studying his face in the golden light of sunset. "Earlier at the courthouse, you said something about figuring things out together." Reese nodded, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I did." "What exactly did you have in mind?" Lydia asked, her heart quickening. Reese took a deep breath, then reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. "Lydia Ashcroft, when I found you running for your life that day, I had no idea how completely you would change mine. I was existing, not living, just getting by, nursing my grudge against Thornton, never moving forward." He squeezed her hands gently. You brought purpose back into my life, courage. Hope, these past days with you have shown me what kind of future might be possible if you're willing to share it with me. Lydia's breath caught as Reese dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. I know it's fast, he acknowledged, his voice rough with emotion. But out here, life moves differently. We've faced death together, fought for justice together. I think we could build something beautiful together, too. He gazed up at her, blue eyes earnest and vulnerable. Lydia, will you marry me? Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unstoppable. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Reese, yes. He rose and pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Reese rested his forehead against hers. Your land or mine? He asked softly. Lydia laughed. Both. We could run cattle on your higher pastures in summer, use my land for winter grazing, build something bigger than either of us could alone. I like the way you think, future Mrs. Hawkins, Reese said with a grin. I like the way that sounds, Lydia replied, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible in the dark days after her father's death. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, they walked hand in hand toward the house that would soon become their home, ready to begin the work of rebuilding not just the ranch, but their lives together. 2 years later, Lydia sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Reese taught their 6-month-old son, Jonathan, to pat the nose of a gentle mare. The baby's delighted giggles carried on the warm summer breeze, bringing a smile to her face. The ranch had flourished under their joint care, combining Reese's higher pastures with Lydia's more fertile lowlands. They ran a respectable herd of cattle now, employed several hands, and had become respected members of the community. Wallace Thornton had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. His empire had crumbled, his properties sold off to pay restitution to those he had wronged. Some of his former men still lived in the area, but they kept a respectful distance from the Hawkins ranch, especially after Jacob Running Fox had become the territory's first Native American deputy marshal, patrolling the region with unwavering dedication to justice. William and Mary remained dear friends, frequent visitors to the ranch. They had become honorary grandparents to little Jonathan, bringing him books and toys, telling him stories of his brave parents. As Lydia watched her husband and son, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed from that terrifying day when she'd fled her home with nothing but the clothes on her back and a deed sewn into her hem. She had lost so much: her father, her sense of security, even her long hair, though it had grown back to nearly its original length now. But she had gained far more. A partner who matched her in courage and conviction, a love that had been forged in adversity and grown stronger with each passing day. A family that filled her heart to bursting. Reese looked up, catching her watching them. He smiled, that same warm smile that had first given her hope in the midst of chaos, and started walking toward the porch, their son cradled securely in his strong arms. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious over here?" he asked as he climbed the steps to join her. "Just how far we've come," Lydia answered, reaching up to take their son, who immediately began playing with a strand of her hair. "From me running for my life to this, all of this." Reese settled beside her on the bench, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I still remember the first moment I saw you," he said, his voice soft with reminiscence. "You were terrified but still fighting, still running. I knew right then you were something special." "And I knew you were my miracle," Lydia replied, leaning into his embrace. "When you said they'd have to go through you to get to me." "I meant it then," Reese said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I mean it now, always will." As the sun set over their thriving ranch, painting the sky in brilliant golds and reds, Lydia Ashcroft Hawkins knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, safe, loved, and free, with the man who had risked everything to stand between her and danger, and the son who represented all their hopes for the future. From the darkest days of her life had come its greatest blessings, and for that she would be forever grateful.